Okay, welcome everyone. Tonight is our big event on behalf of Bentham Science. Tonight's event is Finding Funding. And as always, my partner in crime is my illustrious colleague, the voluminously well-published author and journal editor, university professor, beloved instructor, internet personality. You know him, you love him. It's Professor Gareth Dyke. Gareth, how are you today?
Well, thanks, Scott. I've never been described as voluminous before, but it's nice to see you too. How are you doing? How's the weather over there in Tokyo? Everything going well?
It's absolutely perfect today, aside from the highly allergic pollen clouds that are flying around and troubling everyone here in the central regions of Japan. But otherwise, it's an absolutely gorgeous day. And I hope no matter where our guests are today, we hope you're doing wonderfully well. And we appreciate you taking time out of your morning, afternoon, evening, dead of night, whatever time it is for you. We always appreciate it. And on behalf of our partners at Bentham, we're happy that you're here. And we encourage you to engage with us in the chat. We've switched the chat function on so everyone can chime in, tell us your thoughts, your comments. There's also a Q&A panel where you can ask questions. So we look forward to answering your questions at the end of the event. Today, as always, Professor Dyke is generous with his time and expertise, and we'll try to answer all of your questions the best that we can. Gareth, this is an important topic right now, isn't it? It's rather timely now with news of universities being defunded. There's a lot of turbulent waters right now for everyone. If you're working in a research organization or if you're an individual, it's getting harder than ever to find funding. Um, Anything you'd like our audience to keep in mind tonight, Gareth, as they're listening to your advice on finding funding?
You're absolutely right. Like it's a very tricky time, a tricky moment. But what we're going to try to do in this webinar, we're going to try to provide some tried and tested techniques that you can apply in your next research funding application. It depends on the time of year, it depends on the part of the world that you're in. But yeah, like we're going to talk you through some strategies, some techniques from our own experience writing grants, getting grants funded, talking to researchers around the world who have won lots of funding. So hopefully it will be useful. Let's see how we do. If you're putting your name and where you're from in the chat box, don't forget to click on the everyone link so everybody can see where you're from. Everybody can see like where you're joining us from. We love that at the beginning of these events, don't we, Scott? Like to see where our audience are joining us from.
Definitely. We love hearing from researchers all around the world. Let us know your field or discipline as well, if you'd like to care, if you care to share that with us as well. We always like to know what kind of research you're doing. And we're going to launch a poll in just a second here, just to gauge where you might be in the funding process just now, if you're in fact applying for funding at all. So just a minute, we'll launch a poll. And yeah, as always, we welcome you to engage with us in the chat. We welcome your questions, comments, anything at all. So yeah, don't be shy.
Absolutely, absolutely. I see people are already raising their hands. We'll use the chat box. We'll use the Q&A box, as Scott mentioned, to corral questions. We'll have lots of time for questions at the end of this event. I see India. I see Poland. I see Saudi Arabia. I see, where else do I see? Scott? Japan? Hungary. I'm in Hungary.
I see a couple of bots from cyberspace as well doing auto transcription. That's also very cool. Welcome to all the bots of the world out there. We welcome you as
The
well.
aliens, yeah, also Kosovo, I see. That's fantastic. Do let us know. I think we're just about to get started though, right, Scott? I mean, maybe we have a poll to kick things off.
Sure. Maybe what we'll do is we'll introduce our guests to our colleagues at Bentham Science, and then we'll jump into a quick poll just to see where people are in their funding process.
Okay, so Bentham Science, let me say a few words about Bentham Science. It's a fantastic publisher with about 170 journals in total, 176 journals in total, 40 of which are fully open access. And we'll come back a little bit later. You'll see a QR code that you can share with librarians. If you are a librarian or you know a librarian, perhaps you've got a friendly librarian that you can share our QR code with. We'll get back to you with that in just a moment. But, you know, for now, we're going to talk about grant funding and opportunities for getting your research funded, getting your money, getting that research money in order to help you with your research. Scott?
Great. Let's see where we are in the funding process. So, for our guests joining us, at what stage of funding are you, if any stage at all? Have you recently secured funding? If so, congratulations. That's quite a mountain to climb. Are you currently applying for funding, or someone in your organization or your research organization or your co-authors? Are you applying for funding now? Are you at some point planning to or hoping to apply for funding in the future? Perhaps you're here because you are a funder or you belong to a funding agency and you want to know how authors are going to be approaching funders, or perhaps none of the above. In any case, everyone is welcome today, and we're just curious where you are in the funding process.
It depends on where you are in the world. It depends on the time of year. Like in the UK and Europe, lots of funding cycles work from September, or in the new year from January onwards. But of course, it totally depends on your field, on your subject area, where you're located. But you know, the advice that we're going to give in this event today hopefully will be helpful for you either now or in the future as you try to put your funding applications together.
Absolutely. And occasionally we do have funders who tick that fourth box on this poll. They occasionally show up, lurking. So don't be surprised if your next funder is somewhere among the audience tonight. So let's close our poll and see where we are in the funding application process. So as you can see, we've got actually quite a few people that are either currently applying for funding or planning to in the future. So excellent, over 90% of you. That's great. And thank you so much for joining today. I hope that the information that we share with you is going to be useful. And I remember, Gareth, from doing this talk that my impression from your talk was that a lot of the advice that you're giving authors about funding can actually apply to other stages of the research promotion process as well. So obviously, this is probably pre-research, but in many cases, a lot of the tips and tricks that you share, I think, are also extremely helpful for authors at other stages as well in terms of promoting and talking about your research and communicating your science. Would you say that's true, that these tips are not just for funding?
100%. Absolutely. Totally. Absolutely. Like writing a paper, promoting a paper after publication. You'll see as we get started, I think, in just a few moments with our content today, right, Scott?
Great. Yeah. So let's close the poll and over to you, Professor.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us once again. Do put your name, do let us know where you're from, and do give us any information about you that you'd like to share, or give us questions about the grant writing and funding process. Because, of course, as good old Pablo Picasso is famous for having said, I'm just one step away from becoming rich. All I need now is money. And we're many of us in that situation, many of us in our research careers looking for funding to support our research. It's a perennial problem. It's a huge issue for academics all around the world, for researchers all around the world. So what we're going to do in this webinar, in this event today, is we're going to talk about three related parts of the funding cycle. We're going to talk about before you put a grant application together, things to do, during the proposal writing process, and then after the submission of the grant itself. And all of these tips, as Scott mentioned, not just applicable to grant writing, they're applicable to all of the research funding and research writing process. But the goal of this event, the goal of this webinar, thank you very much to our friends at Bentham Science. We'll come back and we'll talk more about Bentham Science, the publisher, a little bit later on. The whole goal of this event is to help you more effectively write a grant application. So let's get going. Let's start with a few tips before you put your next funding application together. Absolutely crucial things to think about before you write a funding application. And it may sound a bit basic, it may sound a bit obvious, but these are mistakes that researchers very often make. They don't do their research. They don't have a clear question ready to go with the funding application. And this is absolutely critical, as you'll see in a moment. One of the top tips that we have, probably the top tip for successfully writing a funding application, is have some data, some results, some conclusions from preliminary work that can go into the funding application ready for your application itself. Show that the proposal is going to be successful. This is a key trick that I learned working as an academic. I've seen it a lot with successful funding applications, with successfully funded research grant applications. Have some results, have some data that show that it's going to work, the proposal is going to work. And thirdly, use pictures. Very, very important as well. Many of the people, many of the proposal assessors, as you'll see a little bit later, people who will likely be looking at your research proposal will not necessarily be subject area experts. So using pictures to illustrate what you are going to work on, what you would like to show with your proposal, is also critically important. So to get started with a funding application, you need an idea or a series of related questions. You also need a funding agency, of course. You need to have targeted where you're going to send your application. Again, sounds basic. Some data, as I mentioned already, you'll be wanting to show in your proposal that if the agency gives you money, if the funding agency, the government, the research council, even your own university, if they're going to give you money, what you're going to spend it on is going to work. So data, very important. And again, as well as we'll talk about a little bit later, you're going to need enough time to put the proposal together. Again, if you're anything like me, you leave everything to the absolute last minute, as Scott knows very, very well, working with me for the last few years. You do need to have enough time to put your proposal together. Very, very important as well. And this is great advice. For example, those pesky European Union grant applications that those of us working in Europe often try to apply for, they take loads of time. So depending on your funding agency, you need to budget enough time to put the proposal together. So starting with a good idea, you are going to write a proposal for a funding agency that has a great chance of getting successfully supported. But you do need a good idea to begin with. Does your idea for research funding, for research work, address an important problem? Will scientific knowledge be advanced? Does your research, what you plan to do, build on or expand on current knowledge? And most important as well, for a funding application, is what you propose to do feasible, both to implement as well as to investigate? And again, this is why having preliminary data, being able to show that what you're going to get money for is going to work, is a great, great idea at the outset. So having preliminary data from some of your earlier research that shows your idea is feasible and it's going to work to implement and to investigate is a really, really, really good start. How do you come up with good ideas, though? And this is something that Scott and I get asked a lot in the workshops that we do. Where do those great research ideas come from? And again, if you're anything like us, always working, always emailing, always in meetings, always talking to people, you do need, as a researcher, to make sure that you give yourself that time and space to think about your research and, of course, to come up with good new ideas. What are your hobbies? Fishing or doing magic? I don't know, but make sure you do give yourself time and space to think and come up with new ideas for your research, which is difficult, we know, in the current academic environment. But you can implement a number of tricks and tips to come up with good ideas for your research. Some of those AI tools as well. If you have a look on the Bentham Science YouTube channel, you'll see lots of other content, lots of other ideas, lots of other presentations that you can have a look at to help you build a research project, to come up with ideas. But you do need to evaluate the literature. You can do this, of course, with a range of AI tools, including things like Jenny.ai, Site.ai, for example, and identify research gaps, which of course have to be focused. You've got to be able to show that this is going to work, something that's not yet been addressed, or indeed, if you're going after research topics that have previously been addressed, perhaps there's space for new research. Perhaps there's areas, ideas that have not yet successfully been addressed. Also could be very, very important. You develop your proposal, brainstorming ideas with colleagues, with mentors, reviewing the literature to identify research gaps, finding collaborators. Perhaps if you're going for a big network grant from the European Union, for example, you need to find some colleagues, some collaborators from other countries, from other institutions. We, of course, can help with that, or our great friends at Scientify Research can also help you with that. And that's a link I know we're going to be putting in the chat. Scientify Research, asking other people, seeking advice from researchers in your field of interest. And our top tip, number one top tip for successful research funding: get your grubby little hands on a previously funded research proposal from the research funding agency that you are applying for. Very, very, very important. Talk to people, find out if there are other researchers at your institution in your field who've gotten funding previously from that research council, that national agency, that organization. Get your hands on a previously funded proposal, because that will really, really help you to shape your research proposal and make sure you are doing what the funding agency wants you to do. So, top tips before you start to write: will obtaining this grant actually help me in my career or in my studies? Do I have time to manage all of the requirements? Do I actually meet the criteria? You'd be amazed how many people apply for research funding when they don't actually meet the funding criteria. Is it going to be feasible for me to finish this application prior to the deadline? Is there a necessary output, and is that really achievable in the frame of the grant? I know it's really, really tempting to just apply for every possible funding avenue that you see as a researcher that you've identified on search sites like Scientify Research, but do you have the time? Will this actually help, and will this advance your career? So, when you pick a funding agency, also very important to keep in mind: do you know the culture of the funder? Are you able to follow their instructions? Do you know the assessment criteria? Are you going to be able to treat this application like an argument? Are you going to be confident with your proposal? Do you have access, or collaborators who have access, to the appropriate disciplinary concepts and methods? Very, very important as well. You've got to know your audience. Just like writing a research paper for a journal, you've got to discover who the audience are for the funding application. Who's going to be reviewing it? Who's going to be looking at it? Who's going to be assessing it? Will it be reviewed internationally, like many European Union grants are? Will it be reviewed by a national panel, as used to be the case when I worked in good old Ireland, just a local panel of experts? Or, as in the case of good old National Geographic grants that I used to apply for all the time, will there be experts from around the world assessing the proposal? I would keep in mind, if I were you, that most grant applications that you write in your career as an academic will not be reviewed by subject area specialists. So that's key when you put the proposal together. Remember, we talked about the use of figures a little bit earlier on, but there will be huge variations in terms of how you put proposals together depending upon the culture of the funding agency, depending upon the type of funding, who the funding agency are, and who will be assessing, who will be reviewing that proposal. So get your hands on a previously funded application, learn about the culture of the funding agency, and figure out who is going to be looking at the proposal when it goes for review. And here's some really, really, really important slides, because we asked a number of funding agencies from around the world, the NIH in the United States, the UK Research Council, what are some of the most common reasons for not receiving funding? Reasons why grant applications got rejected. Have a look at these, take screenshots of these. I'm not going to read them out, but you can see the reasons why funding applications have previously been turned down in the past. Lack of new ideas, lack of experience in the essential methodologies, an uncritical approach, topic not important enough, not likely to produce useful information, method unsuitable to the objective. And we know from assessing research papers, research articles that go for peer review, the method that you propose to use is often the area where most criticism will come. And look at that second to last one, lack of preliminary data. We mentioned already having preliminary data to show your funding agency, your peer reviewers, that what you propose to do is actually going to work is a great starting point. You don't want to waste time and energy. As you can see here in the biomedical sciences, lots of research that gets done is wasted because relevant questions don't get addressed, incomplete reviews of the literature, inappropriate methodologies, reporting, or the clinical trials, the research work ends up being unpublished. And really, in this age of AI and lots of ways to help researchers generate ideas, search the literature, really doing wasteful research is not really acceptable anymore. So we do need to have good ideas. We do need to think about the purpose of our funding application. Why are you doing this? Why are you writing a funding application? You've got to have a worthwhile research project. You've got to demonstrate that you have the competence to complete the project. Discuss all relevant aspects of the process as a supervisor, perhaps as a grant or as a funder, because your grant application, if it is successful, will provide you with stepping stones to new opportunities. So that's the first part of our presentation today. Things to do before you sit down and you write the proposal. How are we doing, Scott? Everything going so far okay?
Doing great. And I've just shared with our guests today some information on Bentham Science. There's a PDF there in the chat window, and there's a link. If you are a library sciences manager, then you can get a free trial for 3 months for Bentham's high quality journals in your institution. There's no obligation and there's no strings. And there's a QR code in that PDF. I'll also copy and paste the link to our free trial here in the chat window. So again, if you are a librarian, you can get a free trial for Bentham Science for your institution with no strings attached. So, and there's also a PDF there. You can find out a bit more about Bentham Science if you are new to Bentham.
It's a great choice if you're looking for a good journal for your next research paper. Bentham Science could be your next route to publication. And that's like, we'll talk about Bentham a little bit more as well in the Q&A at the end of our presentation. Shall we move on and talk about during the proposal writing process, Scott?
Sure. I wanted to just make a point that I think is really important that you shared in the before section. I think you'll touch on this again. There is something about, to be frank, there is something about money that crystallizes our efforts. And as soon as money or funding becomes a factor, yes, it increases our stress level, it goes up, but it does tend to crystallize our efforts and it forces us to be more, I guess, more salient and more concise and more focused in what we're producing for someone. So I think, yeah, sometimes money can be very stressful for us, can be a negative, but it's also a great sharpener that focuses our efforts. So that's something to keep in mind, I think.
100%, like especially if you feel that you have a great chance of winning a funding application, at least at the universities I've worked at, getting grant money is just as important in terms of how you get assessed by your institution as winning and getting those research papers published. So let's have a quick look now at some tips and tricks that we do have, Scott and I, for doing the proposal writing itself. And if you've listened to any of our article writing presentations, you'll notice that many of these might be quite similar, but in a slightly different way, because tips for grant writing, key message. What's the key message that you want your grant to address? Keep repeating that because, of course, many of the people assessing your proposal will not be experts in that area. You do need clear, aims and objectives that are testable, methods that are clear, and a budget that's reasonable and clearly explained. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But if you've got your grubby little hands on a funded proposal from your funding agency previously, then of course have a look at that as you put your budget together. We use this slide in our grant and journal article writing presentations, but it's important to think how you are going to explain what you're going to do in your proposal to people who don't know anything about your research, like my grandmother shown here, or the bus driver. How are you going to explain in simple, easy to understand words and phrases the message, the key takeaway, why your research is important? You've got to have a clear background in addition to a clear message. So turning to the literature that pertains to your area of interest, ideas from courses, ideas from media, news, magazines, for example, and you've got a strategy as you put your proposal together that addresses all of those relevant components with a great title that's concise yet sufficiently descriptive and a strong abstract or statement to bring the best out of your proposal at the beginning. And we also very much encourage you to think about your research in terms of how it will generate impact. And that's not just to do with academic impact, how many citations, how many papers, how many people are going to read the research article, but also what difference will your research make to the lives of ordinary people. In Ireland, we used to have a section on our national funding applications that said, write down what difference this proposal is going to make to the people of Ireland. And that is critical as well to think about. You've got to show, as we'll talk about again in a moment, the difference that your research is going to make to people who pay the funding, who pay their taxes, who give money to the government. So do keep that in mind as well. Prepare to write. Original nature of your idea. Why is this new and interesting? How does your work relate to a hot topic? What's new and challenging? What solutions do you provide to difficult problems? And put this together in a few sentences. The key message, the key takeaway, the key question that your research grant is going to address. Because again, many of the people who might be assessing it will not be experts in your subject area. And I come back to this again and again. You do need to have some preliminary data that shows what you're applying for is not just blue sky, that you are going to be successful or you are likely to be successful with your research that you're asking for funding for. So this is great. This is fantastic. You should demonstrate that your prior work has prepared you to carry out this research successfully with your experience, your publications, research with key collaborators, any unpublished work and abstracts, and your earlier work, how that relates to the current proposal. And of course, pictures, pictures, pictures. They really are worth 1,000 words. Images rather than words, if possible. This is great advice for successful grant writing. I got it from some friends back in the UK who won millions of pounds in research funding. They said, put pictures into your proposals rather than lots of words. And also, another piece of fabulous advice I have is become friends with an accountant. This is my friend Jonathan. He's also from my hometown in Southampton. He helps with the numbers. You do need to have that support if, like me, you're not great with numbers. When you put your budget together, you're going to have to make sure that it is reasonable, basically accounted for, effectively justified, so that you do have the best chance of winning the money. How much do you actually need to carry out the project? If your grant is for $100,000, you may not need to ask for all of that money. What are the allowable costs? What are the unallowable costs? In the United States, for example, you're not typically allowed to use federal funding for certain kinds of things. You do need to find this out, talking to your accountant at your institution, your friends, figure out what's going on with your research proposal. And a budget justification is also very, very important. Concise statements about your needs for key equipment, personnel, supplies, and travel. Any space, any drugs, any supplies, any salaries that might be covered by your university or other fellowships. Of course, the level of detail depends on the grant, but this is very important to make a reasoned justification for what you are going to spend your funding agency's money on. Think about these 3 key points for putting together your proposal and its budget. Is this a realistic solution to a problem? Is the proposal cost effective? Very important as well, because the reviewers will be assessing this. And do you and your team, your research team, and your friends, your research group, collaborators from around the world, do you have the competence to complete the project? And you're going to have to demonstrate that in the proposal. Realistic, cost effective, and your degree of competency as you evaluate your resources. And we do have lots of help that we can provide you with on this topic. You put together your table of methods, what you need to do, the methodologies, the time required, who's going to do this, and the required materials. We do strongly recommend that these kinds of tables go into proposals. Often in funding applications, you'll see them set up as Gantt charts or flow charts, but this is a great exercise to go through as somebody putting a proposal together. What do you need to have? What do you need to do to reach your objectives? And of course, if, again, like me, you're not all that numerically minded and you're going to be using statistics, do consult with a statistician. Make sure you have thoroughly thought about your results, what you're going to get, and how you're going to analyze them before you begin the writing of the proposal. Because again, in the methods, your peer reviewers are going to be looking at these components. And we also like to ask everybody to do think about what stage of the funding process you are at. You might be joining us today as our survey at the beginning was talking about what stage of the funding process are you at? Questions, coming up with fundable ideas, starting to work on a proposal needing some guidance. Well, we're here to help with that. Or you've got a proposal written, perhaps you need some editing support, some illustrations, or a little bit of pre-review. We can also provide you with that support as well. So do get in touch with us at the end if you would like some support with any phases of the proposal writing itself. We are here, Scott and I, to help you become an effective communicator as you convince your grant agency that your study, your research proposal deserves to be funded. Do you have a relevant problem? Are you logically organizing your research plan? And are you effectively communicating your ideas? As this event, we hope, will help for you to do that. Who's going to be evaluating the proposal? Is it going to be multidisciplinary? Will it be international? In which case there might be some cultural considerations, as well as the ages of your peer reviewers. So as well as getting your hands on a previously funded proposal, we do also recommend that you have a look on the website of the funding agency and find out who is going to be reviewing it if you can. And what they will be looking at is also key. 3 important aspects are usually assessed when proposing and reviewing a grant application, a funding application. People will basically look at these 3 elements. Does the study need to be done? Or does the reviewer feel that it's superfluous, that it's not really an important research question? Secondly, they ask themselves, will this study, if important, be conducted well? And that's to do with the methodology, to do with your competency and the competency of your team. And thirdly, will this study actually be useful? So do ask yourselves these 3 questions as you put your proposal together. Does it need to be done? Will it be done well by our team? Have we shown that we have the competency to do the work, to do the proposal? And will the study be useful? Our 3 key points for funding agency proposal development are again here. Is this realistic? Is it cost effective? And do we have the competence to actually complete the project? And of course, just like writing a research paper, very, very important to get feedback from your colleagues, from other peers in your field before you submit, which is another reason why it's so important to give yourself the time that you need to make sure you have everything in place before you get going. So why not find one or two or three non-competitive colleagues in your field and ask them for feedback on your proposal. Introduce the topic and objectives. Give them a date by which you'd like to ask for feedback by, and then revise your proposal based on that feedback. Give yourself time to put everything together and follow our tips for improving readability. Short sentences. Limit those sentences to 15 to 20 words. One idea per sentence in your grant proposal writing. And here we overlap with our article writing training because we encourage you to use the active voice. Simple, more direct, and easier to read. Have a look at style guides like the APA style active voice rather than the passive voice as you look at ways to improve the readability of your proposal. Repetition, giving people that key message again and again and again, using parallel structures in the proposal itself and being consistent with your terminology, especially, by the way, if you're putting a proposal together from multiple different collaborators, as is often the case in big grant applications with lots of different colleagues. You're going to need to have a number of pieces of essential information as you put your proposal together: your plan, your summary, a background, a purpose, and results and implications based on your previous work, as well as these pieces of potential additional information: a budget, a dissemination plan, credentials of the different researchers involved, and also maybe reference letters to support the application itself. Your proposal summary should be short, usually 2 to 4 paragraphs. You're going to review the background, state the problem and objectives, describe your methodology, very important as we've talked about, what expected results will your proposal generate and what's their significance and implication. You're going to have a grant purpose, a background, research methods. How will you perform the study and your expected results and significance? So as you put the proposal together, be ready with the component sections with these different bits. And of course, your summary, just like the abstract of a research article itself, is often all that people are going to read. This is often the only section read by the funding committee. So what will be learned? Why is this worth knowing? And why and how will your conclusions be validated? Keep this in mind. The proposal summary, depending on your funding agency, of course, but this section, this summary may very well be the only part of the proposal that an assessor is going to read. And so, just like a research article, start broad. Give the reader of your proposal the current state of the field, and then talk to them about the problems. Talk to them about what the proposal is going to address. What problems in the field will this particular research funding application seek to address? Introduce the context. Give the reader that big picture. Why is this interesting? Why is this proposal particularly important, relevant? Why is this topic worth funding? We give you an example to do with birth rates in Saudi Arabia. Why is this important? Well, it may have a knock-on effect on domestic food production. Give the reader the bigger context to the perhaps quite specific piece of research that you're going to be looking at. Your current state of the field comes from a literature review, which of course you can do using AI, and we'll talk about that in the Q&A, I'm sure. But what's been done previously? What are the current solutions, the problems, the limitations, and the active debates? Look at a variety of different databases to get information about your research area, and of course, use those fantastic AI tools that are out there to help researchers with these areas, because your problem, your funding issue has to be important, but it's also got to be solvable, right? Your funding agency is going to look at your proposal and think, this is a really important question, and if we give them the money, they're going to be able to solve the problem. So you do need to be able to describe your research problem in one clear, easy to understand sentence that even my granny or the bus driver could understand. Your methodology as well. You logically describe what you're going to do in the research in a sequence. What, who, how will it be done, and what particular kind of data analysis will you be using? Very, very, very important steps to success in your methodology. And remember, we talk about this a lot, Scott and I, the methods of grant applications as well as research proposals are key, because this is often where people tend to have issues when they peer review or when they assess proposals for funding. Where's your innovation? How is this different to other similar studies or other similar grants? Where's your competency? Show that you have the experience, the expertise to do the research. And of course, you can put lots of other information into your appendices online, perhaps point people reading the proposal to your website. But as I've mentioned several times already in this presentation today, you will need some preliminary studies that show that what you're going to do in your proposal is going to work. Validate your hypothesis. Show that you have the available resources. Pilot studies you've previously conducted demonstrate your expertise and technical efficacy, as well as shows your group, your research team's clear interest in the proposed plan, and of course can be used to justify collaborations as well. Preliminary results are very important, as well as being able to clearly and effectively identify in your proposal your limitations. Any limitations in the study design, any limitations in the data analysis. What are you going to do to mitigate, control for these limitations? Show that you're aware of them in your proposal, takes away a big piece of potential problematic criticism that you might get during peer review, during the grant application review process. And this also establishes your expertise once again in the field and in the budget. As we've discussed as well, when putting your budget together, talk to your friend, the accountant, my friend Jonathan that I showed in a previous slide, considering all of the costs associated with the study, the salaries, the operating costs, the travel, the equipment, information systems, and consumables. Be reasonable, be effective, and justify your budget. Show your costs in a table in the way that your proposal is asking you to justify. You do need to convince your grant funding agency that your study deserves to be funded as you consider a relevant problem, effectively communicating your ideas to the wider world and logically organizing your research plan. So, as we move into the third, and I'm sure you'll be delighted to hear, final component of our presentation today, we've so far talked about before. Things to think about before you write your proposal, then issues to consider during the proposal writing process. Let's jump in and quickly discuss a few things that you can have in mind after you make your proposal submission, because sending the proposal off to the funding agency is not necessarily the end of the process. Sometimes you have the chance to respond to comments that you might receive on grant applications. Not often, but sometimes. And if you do get comments back, deal with them in a very similar way to the way that you might deal with comments that you might receive on a research article. Respond politely, respond in a measured and calm manner, and fully incorporate any reviewer's suggestions into a revision of your proposal, addressing all of those concerns in the rebuttal and addressing that rebuttal back to the funding agency itself, because very often you get asked for revisions both on your grant applications and more often on your research articles. How you deal with criticism about your work can have a big knock-on effect on your eventual success. So be confident, believe that your work is good, believe that your research has the chance to be funded. This confidence, and if you exude it in your proposals and in your journal articles, you are likely to be more successful as an international researcher. And as we often discuss in our training webinars, Scott and I, you do have the chance of success if you pick an important research question, you use the right method to answer it. And of course, we are here at SciTrain at Bentham Science to help you be effective in the way that you communicate your ideas to the wider world. Scott, how are we doing? Everything going well so far?
Yeah, going great. And we've got some questions coming in from our audience. So just a reminder that if you have a question about ending funding, Gareth is here to answer your questions. We've got time left for Q&A today, so don't be shy. Feel free to click on the Q&A panel there. And if you've got a question, a burning question about funding, feel free to ask us. We will try to answer. If it's out of our scope, we will, of course, refer you to someone who might know the answer to the question. But feel free to ask us, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can today.
Absolutely. And it's great to see so many people joining us from all over the world. I mean, we've had people really from pretty much everywhere, all time zones that you could imagine joining us in our webinar today, which is fantastic. Thank you so much to everyone.
And also a range of career stages as well. We've got everyone from early career researchers, mid-careers, postdocs, and more experienced researchers joining us as well. And that tells us that funding is, in fact, a pain point for almost anyone, no matter your career stage as a researcher. So yeah, great to have everyone here. And we've got some questions coming in. Gareth, shall we just start with some of the questions that our audience have shared?
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah. And you can do this either in the webinar chat or by putting your questions into the Q&A box, which is a separate function here on Zoom. Brilliant.
Okay, there's several here. Let me see if I can pick one that's most relevant for us. Um, Okay, for example, this is a great question. I think a great general question. Earlier, Professor Dyke, you talked about the importance of clear and readable and simple writing for non-specialists in your area. That's very important because most funders will be non-specialists. So the question from our guest here is, how detailed should the research plan be or not be? Well, that's a great question.
Yeah, that is a great
How
question.
do we
And
strike a
again,
balance between, yeah, answering the questions that we anticipate from funders that we expect they will ask without overwhelming them with too much information or data? Any thoughts?
yeah, again, I think that really comes back to the advice that we've given everybody joining us today, which is that if you're going to go, let's say, for a grant, let's, for argument's sake, from the European Union, just to give one example, and you've identified that specific funding mechanism that you're going to apply to, really do spend time and energy talking to people who've previously won that funding and see if you can get them to give you a copy of funded proposals or several funded proposals, because an answer to that question, like how much detail should I include, really depends on the proposal. And the best advice we'd have would be to look at something that's been funded and tailor your proposal in the same way so that you put the same level of detail, more or less, into your proposal as applications that have successfully passed through that funding agency in the past. So obviously, if you apply to a subject area specific panel, then you're going to need more information. But, you know, to a general panel, to a general research panel, then less information is key. Just like targeting your research to higher or lower impact factor journals, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Gareth, for your advice there, and thanks for your question to our guest. There's a related question here. The question is, should I include preliminary data in the proposal, and what if I don't have any preliminary data? Hmm.
Well, yes, you absolutely 100% should include any preliminary data that you have in the proposal. I mean, don't worry about that being stolen or taken by the funding review board. That hopefully will never happen. You can also, by the way, put your funding applications on preprint platforms in order to prevent that from happening. You can then refer to your funding applications in future research articles if you've pre-printed them. But yes, preliminary data, very, very important, as we talked about in our webinar today, to show that you will be able to do the work, that you do have a project that's likely to succeed. And that's really important. If you don't have any preliminary data, then I would say have a look at the funding call, the funding mechanism that you're applying to. Do they fund research that's purely speculative, that's purely blue sky research, as we like to say? Perhaps you need to wait for a year or 6 months in order to collect some preliminary data before you go for this particular funding application. That might be another consideration, I would say. Don't rush into writing applications if you have a relatively lower chance of success. And your university, your Office of Funded Research, your colleagues should be able to advise you on these kinds of questions.
Great advice. Thank you, Gareth. A related question from a guest today is a guest had mentioned in the chat that they are the only specialist in their particular field, in their particular country, who works in that specialty, and therefore it's difficult to procure the necessary lab equipment and so on. And a related question from another guest here is, can I apply for funding from a foreign agency if I'm based outside that country? And a number of related questions from our guests about sort of international funding for different areas around the world. Any thoughts on international funding, Professor?
Yeah, I mean these are great questions, and thank you for asking us these fantastic questions. Like it depends on the funding mechanism and the funding agency. So one great piece of advice that we would have is to look at sites like Scientify Research, our friends at Scientify Research, where you can go and search for funding calls that will be relevant to you as a researcher working in a particular field or a particular area. So you will be able, using Scientify Research, for example, to answer those kinds of questions much more easily than we can in this presentation. So can you apply for international funding for your research? Of course. Usually, absolutely. Major funding mechanisms in the United States and the European Union often do allow partner countries, if you're outside one of those regions, to join funding mechanisms. But talk to the funding agency. Don't be afraid to get in touch with us as well. We can help you with any follow-up questions that you might have. But yeah, like usually, yes. If you're the only person working in your research field in your country, well, that's a more difficult situation to be in, I would say. But yeah, in that particular case, you are going to have to collaborate internationally and bring in funding from other regions, from other countries, in order to be effective at what you're doing, I would say. So yeah, great questions. Thank you for those questions.
Yeah, those are great questions, and I hope we partially at least answered your question. Our guest joining us from Bhutan today is an excellent question. Here's another couple of related questions, I suppose. Well, I guess these are not international questions per se, but some good general questions from our guests. The question is, how can I build a long-term funding strategy for my research career? Oh, that's a great question. Thinking ahead. Okay, excellent question.
Yeah, really a great question. So, just like becoming a successful academic and publishing your papers, it's a good idea to have a strategy for that, as our guest has identified. I mean, what I would do in that situation is look at other academics in your field. Go and have a look at other successful researchers working around the world, North America, Europe, Australia, I don't know, like there will be people that you know in your research field who have done that, who have built a successful funding plan for their careers, have managed to successfully secure funding over multiple years for their research teams. And I would talk to them. I would ask them for advice, reach out, gather mentorship group members in your network and ask people, talk to them about what advice they would give you in order to do that. Because of course, different regions, different areas like have different opportunities for funding in different areas. So yeah, I mean, talk to successful researchers. You know, building a plan for funding your research is a great strategy. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful to you. And thank you for that great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. And two related questions here. I think those are both good questions. I think some of them you may have answered already in your talk, Professor, but we'll look at these both. Um, the first question from a guest is, what are the most important components of a strong grant proposal? I think we covered many of those in the talk, and I encourage you to review the video, which we'll send out tomorrow around this time. Check your inbox. We'll send the link to the full video from Gareth's talk, including a transcript you can scan through. So I know some of our guests were asking for PowerPoints. We normally don't share PowerPoints, but I think the video is even better because you can actually revisit the entire talk. You can scan through and just find the particular points that you're looking for. And there's a transcript there, which you can click on just to find points you might have missed. You can even search through it. So have a look at your inbox tomorrow. So to answer the question about important components of a strong grant proposal, I would suggest maybe review Professor Dyke's talk. And I guess the reverse question is, from another guest who asked, what are the most common reasons for rejection of a grant proposal?
We actually
Hmm.
have two slides in this presentation that summarize that exactly. So as Scott just said, do review this presentation when you get it landed in your inbox. Tomorrow, there are two slides earlier in the presentation before you start to write, where we talk to the NIH and the UK Research Council, and we got them to give us the top, I think, about 30 reasons for proposal rejection. So if you avoid those, you should be in relatively good shape.
Okay, great. And again, you can scan through that as the recording goes out tomorrow. And again, there's a transcript there. You can just search through it. Just when you get to the video page, there's a panel on the side, has the transcript of the full talk. You can scan reasons for rejection, and it should come up immediately. So very handy to have that transcript. You can scan through the video just to find any points that you might have missed. Okay, thank you to our guests for those questions. There are a lot of questions related to, um, uh, for example, one guest asks, how do I justify my budget amount without seeming I'm asking for too much? That's a great question. A related question was, how many other related expenses, such as um, living expenses, can I include in a grant proposal? Okay. So I guess the question is, and there's no easy answer for this, I'm sure. How do you get the amount just right? So you're not asking too much, but not selling yourself short and not getting enough funding to fill your needs in terms of lab equipment and other expenses and so on. Is there a magic bullet answer for this difficult question, Gareth, on getting
Um,
just the right amount in your funding
uh,
proposal?
Well, you have to show that what you're asking for is reasonable, and the proposal assessors will be looking at that to decide whether you're asking for too much or too little. So, I mean, depending on your region of the world, like when you ask for like salaries and support expenses, that has to be justified, like, and shown to be reasonable depending upon your career stage, depending upon your geographic location. But yeah, I mean, if you ask for millions and millions of dollars to travel the world constantly for the next 3 years, you're probably not going to get funding. Whereas if you ask for the right amount of travel budget to accomplish your goals and objectives, then you have a much stronger chance of getting the funding. There's no magic bullet answer to this, but be reasonable, of course. And if you ask for too much, then you're far likelier to get problems in the review process than if you ask for too little, I would say, would be one piece of advice. We've just put up here the Bentham Science social media channels, so don't forget to follow, like, and engage with Bentham Science. Don't forget this event today, Scott and I deliver on behalf of Bentham Science. So thank you, everybody, for joining on that basis.
Thanks to all our guests today, and thank you to our partners at Bentham Science, as always. And most of all, thank you everyone for joining us. We're grateful for you taking your time to join the event today and make it such a success. And good luck to everyone on your funding applications, present and future. I hope that Garrett's advice will serve you well. Feel free to let us know how you're doing. You'll get an email tomorrow from us with the full video and transcript. And if you have any questions or comments, anything to share, any questions about Bentham, any questions about the free trial, any questions about funding, feel free to reply to the email. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. And thank you, Professor, as always, for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Scott. And see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.